guys, AK-47 here. It's been quite a while. Had a lot of things on my plate recently, but I'm getting back to making videos again, and I wanted to jump right into doing some AK content. Now, at the outset of my channel, you know, I made it known, you can probably tell by the name of the channel, I'm really into AK-47 rifles, AKM rifles, AK padded rifles in general. Today I wanted to discuss something that I think is going to be, well, low-hanging fruit should any inconvenient gun control measures be passed at the presidential or Congress level, specifically regarding imported rifles. Now, if there are any potential bans on semi-automatic rifles, the most likely direction that would come is for rifles that are from overseas, that are imported, because it would be a lot easier than to say, hey, we're going to ban the manufacture of AR-15s, AK-47s, whatever, stateside. They wouldn't be able to do that without a congressional order, without consensus in the Congress, which thankfully the filibuster is held, and I wanted to discuss some of the more commonly available imported rifles that you could get in terms of the AK platform. Now, on the table we have the Wasser 10 rifle. Now, this is a Romanian import. It's been imported since around 1996, and I've owned one of these rifles before. I sold it pretty quickly after I first bought it. This is probably back in, I don't know, 2008 or so. It was actually the first rifle I ever owned. It's in 7.62x39, this particular example, although they do make examples in 5.56 and 5.45, or rather I should say they did. Currently the only model being imported from Suca, Romania is the 7.62x39 variant. This particular one is a 1973 manufactured model. Technically speaking, that just applies to the receivers. So the way these guns were made back in the 1990s, the early 2000s, you'll notice like the trunnion has a date, but a lot of the other parts are just mismatched. They've been they were pulled out of a truck and they were assembled essentially from raw parts. Now you see that with a lot of the older imports. Now the newer guns, you're going to notice they don't have that feature. You're not going to see like, oh, this was made back in the 70s or anything, because they used all manufactured new parts. So these are all mismatched surplus, you could probably say, if you want to put a finer point on it. So this gun was probably imported early 2000s. Yeah, this is the GP Wasser 1063, so this is one of the 2000s imports, early 2000s. It's in pretty decent shape, all said and done. This gun's been worked pretty well, so the bolts nice and really nice and fluid. A lot of the newer guns, the bolts kind of tough until you work it out. This gun's actually been polished and it's been shot a hell of a lot. So one of the distinctive features on the GP 1063 rifles, or any of the Wasser rifles, is the lack of a dimple here, right above the mag well. And that's usually a dead giveaway. That's a Wasser 10, or that's a Wasser series rifle. You'll notice no frills, no real bells and whistles. You got a standard AKM pistol grip here. You got wood furniture. Now the older guns, I believe those were imported with wood furniture from Romania, or they were surplus wood furniture put in stateside, or put on stateside. The newer imports are going to have kind of like that that really not so desirable Century Arms wood that a lot of the Yugo imports, the MPAPs in particular, had when they were coming in. So moving to the other side, you get a standard AKM rail here for an optic. You got a G2, Tapco G2 trigger. That's something they actually added in the early 2000s because of issues with trigger slap with the original triggers on these guns. Now keep in mind, when they were imported, these were single stack guns. So these have been converted and they are subject to 922R compliance. So you need about 6 parts in here, give or take, to make this a 922R compliant rifle. Alright, so moving on. This is one of the newer imports. This is an M70 rifle, ZPAP. So this is one of the, I believe Zastava refers to this as the 5th generation of their M70 rifle. The first generation actually was imported by Mitchell's back in the 80s. It was an example of the first generation of the guns, although it was a sporterized version. So the first generation of the of I should say the M70 rifle. You know, it's in its military configuration. The first two generations, you'll see the M70 B1, AB2. Those have the AB2 has a folding stock underfolder. B1 has a fixed stock, and they have the grenade launcher sights. Third generation nixed that, and that's where you start getting into the NPAP, OPAP territory. NPAP is Gen 4 actually, and then the Gen 5 is the ZPAP. So Mitchell's imported the first incarnation of this particular rifle with a fairly thick wooden pistol grip. It's pretty distinctive. You'll be able to tell when you see one. They were excellent quality rifles, and unfortunately a company who I've already mentioned, who imports this particular rifle here, started importing the Yugoslavian pattern rifles. And this particular company did a really, for lack of a better word, a very shitty job in terms of the magazine conversions, in terms of replacing some of the parts. They replaced some parts with cast parts. There was a lot of issues with these guns, while Century Arms, I'll say their name, imported these guns. This is where this particular gun actually came from. So back in 2019, Zastava, as a company, the company in Serbia, the one responsible for manufacturing the old military versions of this rifle, it used to be a state arsenal. It is now a semi-private organization. They decided to take it upon themselves to import these rifles into the U.S. themselves. So they established Zastava USA. Through Zastava USA, we have brand new imported ZPAP rifles. Now, the first incarnation of these did not have what you see here, the 1.5 millimeter receiver. That's that bulge that you see on RPK rifles. They just had a standard 1 millimeter AK receiver, and I can't remember if this was a feature or not. I know the MPAPs did not have a scope rail here, especially the underfolding models did not have a scope rail, and they did not have chrome-lined barrels, the originals. This does. So this comes with a chrome-lined barrel, Yugoslavian made. This gun, and this is another thing I wanted to mention, this is a very important feature. With something like the Wasser 10, because of 922R compliance, like I said, you have to pick 6 parts on the rifle to essentially nix and replace with US-made parts. This particular rifle has a G2 trigger. So the entire trigger assembly on this gun has been replaced. That's 3 parts. Then you got a magazine, which is 3 parts, and then whatever, like usually the muzzle brake on here is another part that they'll choose to replace. But on a lot of guns, you're not going to have the original trigger group. Now, Zastava, to their credit, one of the cool things they did with the ZPAP M70 is that everything forward of the buttstock and rear of the handguard here in this case, but you know, like a standard AK handguard will work. Anything rear of the handguard here, it's all made in Serbia. It's all made in Zastava. So this is the original trigger group with the gun. Now, as for US parts, you'll notice they have pistol grip like the Wasser, buttstock US made, even on the wood versions. And in this case, I have a modernized four end here. That handguard actually comes from Zastava. And I actually got the pistol grip with Zastava when I bought the rifle. It came in the polymer configuration with the Hogue grips, but I have since swapped that out. It'll also come with a muzzle brake that's US made, standard AK configuration, so it's going to be just like this slant brake here on the Wasser. This is a more modern part. This is actually part of their new SKU, so their new the new rifle they just released, their new version of the M70, but I have since upgraded this rifle. So prior to me upgrading the certain parts on this rifle to make it like synonymous with the new SKU that they've come out with, you'll get a Archangel adjustable stock, which is actually quite nice. It's very comfortable. I've replaced that with the Zukov, and then you'll get the Hogue grips, as I mentioned, and I've replaced those with the new handguards. And these new handguards are quite nice. You can put any M-lock attachment you want. I'm running a BCM grip like I run in my AR, so it's very similar, kind of from a similar location, so it keeps the same manual of arms for me. I like it. And I know there's a lot of traditionalists out there in the AK community, but you know, I like to have at least one AK rifle that's modernized, and this is my rifle. Yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to comparisons. But the one thing I wanted to talk about here was the availability of import rifles. These two rifles constitute the most common AK variants you will encounter that are import rifles in the United States. And also, more importantly, the most consistently imported. Wasser 10s usually always available. There was a point when the Romanians were tooling up because of the Russian threat in Europe, and they weren't importing as many of these. These are now back in the country. I would recommend swapping out the stock and the handguards with surplus furniture if you have one of the Century models. This model is actually quite good. It has this nice laminated stock. It's quite nice. This is definitely, seems to me at least, to be like an imported stock set. They're available. These guns are available. The M70s are also available, and this is another reason I think why I consider Zastava to be, also the quality of the guns are great, but another reason why I love the Zastava rifles is because of the company. Zastava Arms has spared no expense and has spent a great deal of effort to get these rifles into the country in sufficiently large numbers. And as I said, to their credit, the prices of these rifles have remained pretty consistent compared to other AK variants. Sometimes you'll see these on Gunbroker for $1,500. Don't go on Gunbroker and pay that shit. Don't pay that price. It's not worth it. You will find these in gun shops for sub $1,200. I hope you find it for sub $2,000. Jesus. But yeah, anyway, these rifles here, they constitute the most commonly available, and these are the ones you'll most likely encounter. And these, I would say, are the ones you should focus on if you're trying to avert any consequences of a potential ban. Now, don't go out there and buy it right away. Say, oh my God, I got to hurry up and buy this stuff. It's still going to be available. Don't fear buy it. Trust me, it makes things bad for all of us. But just keep in mind, keep these on the horizon, because if any rifles, if any AK pattern, AR-15 pattern rifles, well, those are usually U.S. made, but if any AK pattern rifles are banned from manufacture or purchase, it's going to be those that are imported from overseas. Well, guys, just to cap the video off, just talk a little bit more about AKs again, because this is really one of my favorite topics when it comes to guns. There's really 3 different types of AKs you can choose from in the United States. You can go with the US-made AK. I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. You can go with a kit build, or you can go with an import. As I said, these are the most perishable, and these are the ones that I would recommend getting if you ask me what kind of AK should I get. One of these two, an Arsenal if you could find it, or if you feel like paying for it, that's great. Well, let's talk for a second about the differences between these categories of AK. Now, personally, I own mostly kit builds. I have, besides the guns you see on the table, I have a M70 AB2T, which is a Century build on a 1mm receiver of a Yugo M70 AB2T, or rather AB2 military rifle. Difference being 1.5mm versus, or 1.5 versus the 1.5mm there. And I have the East German gun, which I've featured quite a few times in my channel. I also have a Russian gun that's being built. It's on the way. I made a video about that probably a few months ago. It is coming, but those constitute the kit builds of my collection. And personally, I quite like kit builds because it's like owning a piece of history. Now, the difference between one of these rifles and a kit built rifle is, of course, they all come from imported parts at one point. But usually the receiver on these guns, on a imported rifle, is made in the host country. Like, as with this Romanian gun here, the gun has a Romanian receiver, made in the Sugar factory, their old military arsenal in Romania. Same with the Yugoslavian example here, or rather the Serbian example. This is made in Zastava, the entire receiver. It's not US made. Like, from here to here, this is all Zastava, Serbia. That's the big difference. So if you're looking for an authentic imported receiver gun, this is the best way to go. If you're looking for a gun with the most imported parts on the gun besides the receiver and some maybe a little bit more history behind it, then you can go with something like a kit build. Atlantic Firearms, they do a lot of great deals on kit built firearms if you can find them whenever they're in stock. You can go on Gunbroker if you want to, but they're out there. A lot of these kit built guns are out there, and they're fantastic firearms. The US-made guns, unfortunately, I'm not going to rank those 3 categories in any tier group of sorts, like the one's better than the other and this is the worst. I will say that US-made AKs, I like the idea. I like the idea of a US-made AK. I feel like if there ever is a ban on import for any kind of AK rifle, I mean, that's pretty much going to be your go-to, besides kit builds, which are at this point drying up. Unfortunately, I think it's an unproven concept, at least right now. PSA has put out some pretty good AKs, but there are a few other companies that have kind of fallen by the wayside. I mean, Century makes the Visca. They made the I'm trying to remember some of the other guns they made because really they're not really worth remembering, unfortunately. They made a milled, I think it was the CV2, was it? The milled version of the Century's AK. I never really got into that, so I'm not really sure. I know they had the Century Arms, they had the Visca, and then prior to the Visca they had a couple other guns. They had the CV2, whatever it was called, and then they had that stamped receiver gun that it was essentially a grenade. Okay, I mean, if you see Rob Ski's channel, he tested out that rifle extensively, and it consistently failed in head spacing. No-go gauge didn't work. I mean, that gun was a grenade eventually. Yeah, I like the idea of US-made AKs, but I think that all said and done, when it comes to your best quality AKs, are either going to be kit built with US-made receivers or imported guns. Now, I really hope to see a day when US-made AKs are just as good as the imported variety. Unfortunately, when it comes to cost, I mean, if you really look at how much these guns would have cost at one point to build, without a massive factory and a lot of state subsidization, it would have been very difficult to build these rifles to the spec that they're at. Sorry guys, you ever get a robocaller? Yeah, robocallers, I get them all the time about my car's extended warranty. Anyway, so back to what I was saying. These guns, in terms of quality, you can't beat them. But you gotta understand, a lot of these guns, they were made in factories that are still in existence today. A lot of this tooling still exists, and these factories were built under, you know, essentially state direction, public funding, and were geared towards just mass production. US-made AKs, you buy a Visca for $700, you know what you're getting. You're getting a gun that was made using, well, quite frankly, cheaper techniques that don't really yield the kind of product you would get from an imported AK. I just wanted to hammer that home. I have nothing against US-made AKs. I think they're great. I think they're a great concept. I hope they take off. But anyway, guys, this is the video today. We're talking about imports. If I had to pick my favorite out of the two, I'd probably pick the Zastava here. I think it's, you know, it's a more modern gun. I think it's been tweaked a lot more. I love the Wasser, though. It's something that has been, I mean, it was my first gun. You know, the Wasser 10 was my first gun. It's always going to have it's always going to have a special place in my heart. I technically like the Zastava better. I think it's built a little bit better, but really you can't go wrong with either of these. And if you want a traditional AK, I mean, a Romanian AK looks really good. It looks just like the Russian example. And if you notice on here, the factory marking right here, factory marking, you probably can't see it from here. It's a triangle with the arrow in it. It looks a lot like an Izhevsk marking. So they're a pretty good facsimile of a Russian example, and they're built to spec. So anyway, guys, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. It's a beautiful day out today, and hopefully I can make some more videos for you. It's been a while, but I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. So anyway, check us out, leave a comment, you know, subscribe, hit the bell, and let us know, you know, if you have any suggestions for future videos, because I'm always open to suggestions. And thank you very much for watching. Crackshot 47 out.